When Marcus opened his front door that Tuesday morning, he never expected to see two people in expensive suits holding briefcases, asking if he was Marcus Williams. His heart sank immediately, thinking his ex-wife had finally found a way to take his children away from him. But what they said next would change his entire life forever, and it all started with a simple act of kindness 3 weeks earlier that he had already forgotten about. This story will remind you that the universe is always watching, and sometimes, the smallest gestures carry the biggest rewards. Before we dive into this incredible journey, if you enjoy stories that touch your heart and restore your faith in humanity, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring more inspiring content to people who need it most. Now, let's get back to Marcus and discover what happened on that fateful day. Marcus Williams was 34 years old and had been raising his twin daughters, Lily and Rose, completely alone for the past 5 years. His wife had walked out one night, leaving nothing but a note on the kitchen counter that said she was not cut out for motherhood. She never looked back, never called, never sent birthday cards. Marcus had cried for weeks, not for himself, but for his little girls who kept asking when mommy was coming home. Life as a single father was never easy. Marcus worked as a mechanic at a small auto shop on the outskirts of town. The pay was decent but never enough. Every month was a juggling act between rent, groceries, school supplies, and the occasional medical bill. He drove a beat-up truck that he kept running through sheer willpower and mechanical knowledge. His clothes were always stained with grease, and his hands were rough from years of hard labor. But despite everything, Marcus never complained. His daughters were his entire world, and he would move mountains to see them smile. The day everything changed started like any other. Marcus had just finished a 12-hour shift and was exhausted to his bones. The autumn wind was sharp as he walked to his truck in the parking lot. That's when he noticed her for the first time. An elderly woman was sitting on the curb near the dumpster behind the shop, wrapped in a thin blanket that had more holes than fabric. Her gray hair was matted, her face weathered by years of hardship, and her eyes held a sadness that made Marcus stop in his tracks. He recognized that look. It was the same look he saw in his own reflection during his darkest days. Most people would have walked past. Most people would have convinced themselves that it was not their problem, that someone else would help. But Marcus was not most people. He thought about his daughters, warm and safe at home with the elderly neighbor who watched them when he worked late. He thought about how close he had come to losing everything after his wife left. One missed paycheck, one unexpected expense, and he could have been sitting on that same curb. Without hesitation, Marcus walked over to the woman. She flinched when she saw him approaching, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders as if preparing for cruelty. That reaction broke something inside him. "Ma'am, are you hungry?" he asked gently, crouching down to meet her at eye level. She stared at him for a long moment, suspicion clouding her features. "Why do you care?" "Because everyone deserves to eat," Marcus replied simply. "There's a diner just down the road. Let me buy you dinner." The woman's name was Eleanor, though she did not share that immediately. She was hesitant at first, clearly not trusting this stranger's kindness. But hunger eventually won over fear, and she allowed Marcus to guide her to his truck. He helped her into the passenger seat, noting how thin her arms were beneath the blanket. At the diner, Marcus ordered her the biggest meal on the menu. A hot roast beef dinner with mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, and a thick slice of apple pie for dessert. Eleanor ate slowly at first, as if she had forgotten how to enjoy a meal, but gradually her pace increased. Marcus ordered himself just coffee. He had been planning to skip dinner anyway to save money, but watching Eleanor eat made him feel fuller than any meal ever could. As she ate, Eleanor began to open up. She told Marcus that she had been on the streets for 3 months. She spoke vaguely about her past, mentioning that she had made mistakes, that she had lost people who mattered, that she had been wandering for a long time trying to find something she could not name. Marcus listened without judgment. He shared his own story too, about his wife leaving, about raising the twins alone, about the daily struggles that sometimes felt insurmountable. "You're a good man," Eleanor said when he finished. Her eyes were wet with unshed tears. "Your daughters are lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," Marcus replied. "They're the reason I keep going." Before they parted ways, Marcus pressed $40 into Eleanor's hand. It was money he had been saving to fix the heater in his truck, but he knew she needed it more. Eleanor tried to refuse, but Marcus insisted. He also gave her his phone number, written on a napkin, telling her to call if she ever needed anything. Eleanor clutched that napkin like it was made of gold. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Marcus said. "I know you're human, and that's all that matters." He drove Eleanor to a shelter across town that he knew had available beds. He made sure she got inside safely before heading home to his daughters. By the time he walked through his front door, exhausted and cold, he had already pushed the encounter to the back of his mind. It was just a small act of kindness, nothing more. 3 weeks passed. The leaves finished falling, and the first frost covered the ground each morning. Marcus continued his routine of work, fatherhood, and survival. He had not heard from Eleanor and assumed she had moved on to a different city, hopefully to a better situation. He had nearly forgotten about that night entirely when the knock came. It was early morning, and the twins were eating breakfast when Marcus answered the door. 2 people stood on his porch, a man and a woman, both dressed in suits that probably cost more than his monthly salary. The man carried a leather briefcase, and the woman held a folder thick with documents. "Are you Marcus Williams?" the man asked. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Lawyers meant trouble. Lawyers meant his ex-wife had finally decided to fight for custody. Lawyers meant his world was about to be torn apart. "Yes," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Williams, we represent the estate of Eleanor Catherine Pemberton," the woman said. "May we come inside?" The name meant nothing to Marcus at first. Then it clicked. Eleanor. The homeless woman from 3 weeks ago. Estate meant she had died. Grief washed over him unexpectedly. He had only spent a few hours with her, but she had felt like a kindred spirit. "She passed away?" Marcus asked as he led them to his small living room, apologizing for the mess of toys and crayons scattered across the floor. "Yes," peacefully, in her sleep, the man confirmed. "But before she died, she made very specific arrangements." Mr. Williams, Eleanor Pemberton was not who she appeared to be. The lawyers explained everything. Eleanor Catherine Pemberton had been one of the wealthiest women in the state. She had built a real estate empire from nothing, starting with a single property in her 20s and expanding into a portfolio worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But wealth had come at a cost. Her only son had died in a car accident 15 years ago. Her husband had passed from cancer a decade before that. She had no other family, no heirs, no one to leave her fortune to. 3 years ago, Eleanor had decided to conduct an experiment. She gave away her designer clothes, left her mansion, and began living on the streets. She wanted to see humanity for what it truly was. She wanted to know if people were still capable of genuine kindness without expecting anything in return. For 3 years, she was ignored, mocked, spat upon, and treated like garbage. She watched people cross the street to avoid her. She heard mothers tell their children not to make eye contact. She was invisible to a world that only valued wealth and status. Then she met Marcus. "You were the first person in 3 years to treat her like a human being," the female lawyer said, her professional composure cracking slightly. "She talked about you constantly in her final days. She said you reminded her of her son." Marcus sat in stunned silence as the lawyers opened their briefcase and pulled out document after document. Eleanor had rewritten her entire will after that night at the diner. She had left Marcus everything. The mansion, the properties, the investments, the bank accounts. All of it. Totaling just over $400 million. This has to be a mistake, Marcus whispered. I just bought her dinner. That's all. That's exactly why she chose you, the lawyer replied. Because to you, it was nothing. To her, it was everything. There was more. Eleanor had also established trust funds for Lily and Rose, ensuring their education and future would be completely secured. She had written a personal letter to Marcus, which the lawyers handed to him in a sealed envelope. He would not read it until that night, after the twins were asleep, and he would cry harder than he had in years. In her letter, Eleanor wrote about the profound loneliness of wealth, how money could build walls as easily as it could open doors. She wrote about watching people pretend to care while only caring about what they could take. She wrote about losing faith in humanity, about considering ending her experiment and her life because she had concluded that genuine kindness no longer existed. And then she wrote about Marcus. About how he had crouched down to meet her at eye level instead of looking down at her. About how he had ordered her food before ordering for himself. About how he had listened to her stories without checking his watch. About how he had given her $40 when it was clear he could not afford to give even $4. You did not save my life that night, Marcus, she wrote. You saved my soul. You reminded me that goodness still exists in this world, even when it is hard to find. You reminded me that the measure of a person has nothing to do with their bank account and everything to do with their heart. Your daughters are blessed beyond measure, not because of what you provide, but because of who you are. Please accept this gift not as charity, but as a thank you from a lonely old woman who finally found peace. The story of Marcus Williams spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up, calling it the feel-good story of the decade. But Marcus never let the attention change who he was. He kept his job at the auto shop for another year before using Eleanor's gift to open his own mechanic business, one that offered free repairs to single parents struggling to make ends meet. He bought a modest home in a good school district, not a mansion, because he wanted his daughters to grow up understanding the value of humility. Every year on the anniversary of that night at the diner, Marcus volunteered at homeless shelters across the city. He told Eleanor's story to anyone who would listen, not to brag about his inheritance, but to remind people that every stranger they pass on the street has a story worth hearing. Lily and Rose grew up knowing exactly what their father had done and why it mattered. They became compassionate young women who looked for opportunities to help others rather than waiting to be asked. When interviewers asked Marcus what lesson he hoped people would take from his story, his answer was always the same. You never know who is watching, he would say. But more importantly, you never know who needs watching over. The homeless person on the corner might be a billionaire in disguise, or they might be someone who just needs to know they matter. Either way, treat them with kindness. Because at the end of the day, we are all just people trying to find our way home. Eleanor Catherine Pemberton's grave sits in a beautiful cemetery overlooking the city she helped build. Marcus visits every month, bringing flowers and sometimes bringing the twins. He talks to her about his life, about his gratitude, about the small moments of kindness he witnesses in the world she helped him see more clearly. And on her headstone, below her name and the dates of her birth and death, is an inscription that Marcus chose himself. It reads simply, "She saw the best in humanity because she was brave enough to look." This story reminds us that kindness is never wasted, even when it seems small and insignificant. You never know how your actions might ripple outward into the universe and return to you transformed. Marcus Williams was just a tired single father trying to do the right thing. He never expected anything in return. And perhaps that is exactly why everything came back to him 1,000-fold. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories, and remember that every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change a life. Maybe even your own.